Marilyn Monroe walked out of the filming. What Dean Martin did to bring her back changed everything. The set was filled with tension as Marilyn Monroe, exhausted from the pressure, suddenly walked off the set of her latest film. The crew was stunned, unsure of what would happen next. With everything on the line, Dean Martin stepped in to make a decision that no one saw coming. What did he do to bring her back? And why did it change everything? The film industry in the 1960s was a world of fierce competition and public scrutiny. Marilyn Monroe, one of Hollywood's most iconic stars, was expected to perform flawlessly. Yet behind her glamorous persona was a woman struggling with self-doubt, mental health battles, and the overwhelming weight of public expectations. It wasn't just the cameras that were watching her every move. It was an entire world ready to judge. On this particular day, as the pressure mounted, Monroe's nerves reached their breaking point. The set was chaotic, and the director's harsh words only made things worse. Monroe, already fragile, snapped under the weight of the demands placed on her. Everyone watched as she stormed off, leaving a trail of shock and disbelief behind her. Dean Martin, the seasoned performer, had seen his share of chaos in the entertainment industry. He was known for his charm, wit, and effortless cool. But underneath that exterior, he was no stranger to pressure himself. Despite his own struggles with fame, Dean had learned to navigate the madness with grace. As the crew scrambled in panic, Dean stayed remarkably calm. He knew the industry had a way of breaking people, but he had also seen how small moments of kindness and understanding could make a difference. His bond with Marilyn had always been a quiet one based on mutual respect rather than the spotlight. He saw the fear and exhaustion in her eyes and knew he had to act, not just as a colleague, but as someone who could help her rediscover her strength. The film, the crew, and the media, none of it mattered as much as Marilyn's well-being in that moment. Dean's decision to intervene wasn't driven by ego or the need to be in control. Instead, it was about offering support when the world seemed determined to tear Marilyn down. He quietly excused himself from the rest of the crew and followed her to her dressing room. There, in the privacy of the moment, he didn't bombard her with words of advice or try to convince her to return. Instead, he simply sat with her, offering nothing but a reassuring presence. The silence between them spoke volumes. It was a gesture of kindness and humanity, one that didn't demand anything in return. It was this quiet understanding that struck Marilyn the most. In the whirlwind of her fame, it was rare for anyone to show her genuine compassion without expecting something in return. Dean's gesture was one of the few moments where she felt like herself again, not just the icon the world saw. As the minutes passed in the dressing room, Marilyn allowed herself to break down. The tears she had been holding back finally flowed. She had always been seen as a symbol of beauty and strength, but behind the facade, she was a woman carrying the weight of an impossible standard. She had been taught to smile, to be perfect, but what if she couldn't? What if the pressure was too much? Dean watched her with quiet empathy, knowing that this wasn't the first time she had experienced such a breakdown. But this time, it felt different. The rawness of the moment, the genuine emotion, allowed both of them to step out of the roles they were expected to play. Marilyn wasn't just a star in that room. She was a woman who needed understanding. And Dean, in his own way, had just shown her that it was okay to be vulnerable. Dean didn't push her to return to the set immediately. Instead, he let her have the space to breathe, to process everything she was feeling. It wasn't until the silence between them felt comfortable that he softly spoke. "Take your time, Marilyn. There's no rush. But remember, we're all here for you." His words were simple, but they struck a chord deep within her. For the first time in a long while, Marilyn didn't feel like she was alone in the struggle. The weight of her public persona, the pressure to be perfect, and the fear of failure had always felt so isolating. But in that room, she wasn't just Marilyn Monroe, the legendary actress. She was Marilyn, the woman who could take a step back and let the world wait. Marilyn sat there for a while longer, gathering the strength to return. The decision wasn't easy. She had built a reputation for being difficult to work with, and her sudden departure from the set would only add fuel to that fire. But as the moments passed, she realized something. The world might expect her to be flawless, but she didn't need to meet their expectations to be worthy. Dean had shown her that she didn't have to fight alone. She stood up, wiped her tears, and walked back to the set, not as a broken star, but as a woman with renewed resolve. The crew and director watched in silence as she returned. There was no grand apology, no theatrical speech, just Marilyn, quietly taking her place. Dean, standing at the side, offered her a subtle nod. The tension that had been palpable in the air began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of mutual understanding and respect. For Dean, this wasn't just about Marilyn's return to the set. It was about changing the dynamic on the entire film. The atmosphere had shifted. There was a silent tension among the crew as they resumed work, unsure of how to address the situation. But for Dean, it wasn't about the film or the expectations of others. It was about showing Marilyn that she had value beyond her public image. He had long learned that in the entertainment industry, the biggest victories were often those won off-screen. The stakes of the moment were high, as the production had already faced delays, and the press was sure to catch wind of the drama. Yet, Dean knew that the most important thing was making sure Marilyn knew she could still stand tall, regardless of what the world expected from her. As the day wore on, something subtle shifted on set. There was an unspoken bond that had formed between Dean and Marilyn. It wasn't something that could be seen in headlines or captured by cameras. It was a silent understanding between two people who had experienced the harsh realities of fame in their own ways. Marilyn, though known for her vulnerability, also had a strength that few could recognize. It was a strength that had been hidden beneath the weight of expectations. Dean, on the other hand, had his own share of personal battles with the pressures of public life, and he knew that sometimes the quietest gestures had the most profound impact. As they worked side by side, their chemistry became undeniable. It wasn't just the technical skill they brought to the scene. It was the humanity they shared, the way they lifted each other up in ways the world would never see. As the scene approached its climax, the stakes became clear. The pressure was mounting again, both for Marilyn and for the entire crew. This time, there was no room for mistakes. The media had already begun to speculate about her departure, and the whispers on set had grown louder. Would she crack again? Could she handle the demands? Marilyn felt the weight of these questions pressing down on her. But this time, there was something different. The fear that had once threatened to consume her was now met with a newfound confidence. She wasn't just playing the part of a glamorous movie star. She was playing the part of herself, a woman who had learned that sometimes the greatest courage came in the moments of silence, in standing her ground when everything else seemed to fall apart. The night of the big scene arrived. The set was alive with the energy of final preparations, the crew moving in a synchronized dance to get everything just right. The tension was palpable, but it wasn't just the weight of the film that was on Marilyn's shoulders. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, the kind that you only feel when something big is about to happen. As the cameras rolled and the lights shone down, Marilyn took her place. For a moment, she felt the familiar rush of nerves, but they were different this time. She wasn't afraid of the eyes watching her. Instead, she felt the calm, steady presence of Dean from across the set. With his quiet confidence, he had helped her see that she was enough. And as the scene unfolded, the world didn't feel so heavy anymore. Marilyn wasn't just performing for the camera. She was performing for herself. The cameras captured every moment as Marilyn's performance unfolded. This wasn't just another scene in a film. It was a powerful statement. The tension in the room was tangible as Marilyn gave her all. Each word, each movement filled with emotion. But the real drama was off-screen. The crew watched in awe, recognizing that something extraordinary was happening. For the first time, Marilyn wasn't playing the role of the perfect star. She was being authentic, vulnerable, and strong at the same time. It wasn't just about the film anymore. It was about her reclaiming her space in a world that had often tried to define her. The silence between takes, the subtle expressions on her face, spoke volumes to those who truly understood her struggle. Dean, standing at the edge of the set, couldn't help but smile. He had known that this moment would come. The world would witness Marilyn's true strength, not in the perfection of her performance, but in her raw, emotional honesty. As the scene reached its emotional peak, something unexpected happened. Marilyn's character was supposed to deliver a line full of heartache, a moment of emotional release. But instead of just acting it out, something deep within her cracked open. The line, meant to be scripted, became more than words. It became a release for Marilyn herself. She wasn't just portraying grief. She was feeling it. The emotional intensity in her performance brought the entire set to a standstill. Dean, who had always known that the magic of a performance lay in its authenticity, couldn't help but recognize that this moment was bigger than any film. It was Marilyn's truth unfolding before everyone's eyes, raw and unfiltered. The crew stood in silence, watching the shift in her energy, as if they had been witnesses to something monumental, something that would change not only the direction of the film, but Marilyn's place within it. The director, watching from behind the camera, couldn't ignore the tension anymore. Marilyn had gone off script, an act that, in the world of Hollywood, was often seen as an unforgivable breach. But Dean, recognizing the significance of the moment, stepped forward. In front of the crew, the director, and the cameras, he made a decision that no one expected. With a calm but firm voice, he addressed the situation, not as an actor, but as a human being. "She's not just reading lines," he said, his words cutting through the tension. "She's giving us a piece of her soul. Let it be." His words silenced the set. The director, who had been ready to call for a retake, paused, as if struck by the power of Dean's defense of Marilyn's authenticity. The crew watched, and for the first time, they saw something different in Dean. It wasn't just his charm that commanded respect. It was his unwavering support for his fellow actor, for a woman who had long been seen as a commodity. Dean's genius reaction wasn't just about making a point. It was about recognizing the value of human vulnerability in a world that often preferred perfection. The director's face was one of clear frustration, but there was also a trace of something else, realization. He had been so focused on the mechanics of filmmaking, on perfection and control, that he had forgotten the heart of the process. As the silence stretched on, Marilyn looked at Dean, her expression softening with gratitude. But it wasn't just a grateful look. It was the look of someone who had been given permission to truly be herself. The director, after a long pause, nodded curtly, acknowledging Dean's point. There was no apology, no grand gesture of understanding, just a shift in the air. The power dynamic had changed in that moment, and for the first time, the director seemed to understand that what was happening on set was bigger than his vision for the film. It was about human connection, vulnerability, and the courage to stand up for what mattered. Marilyn had been given space to breathe, and in turn, the scene was given room to soar. Backstage, the crew whispered, but this time it wasn't with judgment or speculation. It was with admiration. Marilyn had done the unthinkable. She had fought back against the pressures of an industry that demanded perfection, and in doing so, she had gained something far more valuable: respect. Dean, ever the calm figure, watched as Marilyn found her way back to the set. There were no grand apologies or dramatic confrontations, just a quiet acknowledgement that this was a turning point. The whispers of the crew turned to murmurs of approval. In the midst of the tension, they had seen a rare moment of humanity. Marilyn Monroe was no longer just a movie star. She was a woman who had stood up for herself, and in doing so, had earned the respect of those around her. Dean's support had been the key, but it was Marilyn's courage that had turned the tide. As the day wore on, the tension that had once gripped the set began to dissolve. Marilyn, now more grounded in her authenticity, delivered her lines with a renewed sense of confidence. The director, who had once seen her as difficult to manage, now saw her in a different light. His earlier frustration had melted into a quiet respect. The crew, who had once whispered about her struggles, now looked at her with admiration. There were no more harsh words, no more power plays. The scene flowed smoothly, with Marilyn leading the way, no longer weighed down by the pressure to be perfect. Dean, ever the silent supporter, watched as the set transformed from a place of tension to one of mutual understanding. What had once been a battleground for control was now a space where human connection took precedence over ego. For the first time that day, Marilyn smiled. It wasn't a forced smile for the cameras, but a genuine, peaceful one. One that said, "I've reclaimed my power." After the scene was wrapped for the day, the set emptied out, and the crew dispersed. Marilyn, still shaken but stronger, walked over to Dean, who had been waiting quietly on the side. She had a soft smile on her face, but her eyes reflected the weight of everything she had been carrying for so long. She approached him, and without saying a word, she simply placed a hand on his arm. It was a quiet gesture, one of gratitude and understanding. Dean turned to her, his eyes filled with warmth. "You did great today, Marilyn. The world needs more of that," he said softly. Marilyn's voice, usually so guarded, was filled with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." In that moment, there were no cameras, no directors, no expectations, just two people who had found something real amidst the chaos. They didn't need to say much more. The silent connection between them spoke volumes. It wasn't just a professional moment. It was a moment of deep human understanding. Later that evening, after the rush of the day had passed, Marilyn and Dean sat together in a quiet corner of the studio lot. It was rare for the two of them to have a private conversation outside of the set, but tonight felt different. Marilyn opened up in a way she hadn't before, speaking honestly about the struggles she had faced over the years. She talked about the loneliness that came with fame, the constant need to live up to others' expectations, and the deep sense of inadequacy that had plagued her for so long. Dean listened intently, never interrupting, never trying to fix things. He simply allowed her to speak her truth. "I don't know how to stop the voices in my head," she admitted, her voice trembling. Dean's response was simple, but it struck at the heart of her pain. "You don't need to silence the voices, Marilyn. You just need to stop listening to them." It wasn't the solution to all her problems, but it was a turning point. For the first time, Marilyn felt that she had permission to take control of her own narrative. The next morning, Marilyn arrived on set with a different energy. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic speech, only a quiet resolve. As she stepped onto the set, the crew noticed the shift. She wasn't trying to be perfect anymore. She was simply being herself. Dean watched her with a knowing smile. He understood that this wasn't just about the film. It was about Marilyn taking back her life, her power, and her story. The director, too, seemed to have a newfound appreciation for her. He didn't push her to perform at the same frantic pace as before. Instead, he allowed her to find her own rhythm, and it was in this space that Marilyn thrived. The film was finished ahead of schedule, but more importantly, it was finished with a sense of dignity that hadn't been there before. Marilyn had found a way to redefine her own success, and in doing so, had changed the dynamics of the entire production. As the years passed, the story of Marilyn Monroe walking off the set and returning with newfound strength became a legend in Hollywood. The moment wasn't captured in headlines or tabloid stories. It was felt by those who were there, who understood the significance of what had happened. Dean's quiet support and Marilyn's courage became a symbol of how powerful small acts of kindness could be in an industry that often prioritized perfection over humanity. In interviews, Dean would reflect on that moment, sharing how it had changed both of their lives. Marilyn, too, would speak about it in her later years, calling it one of the most important moments of her career. "It wasn't the world's approval I needed," she would say. "It was my own." And so, the story lived on, not just as a moment in Hollywood history, but as a testament to the power of vulnerability, the strength in standing up for oneself, and the enduring legacy of those who dared to be real in a world that demanded perfection. Marilyn Monroe's journey to reclaim her voice was more than a single act. It was a lesson in vulnerability, courage, and self-respect. What would you do if you had to choose between meeting the world's expectations and staying true to yourself? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.